welcome everyone to the Standing Committee on Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability. With us today we have, well, just our normal committee members, and also today Peter Bevan Baker is joining us, so welcome Peter. And our guest as well, the PEI Federation of Agriculture, President Ron Maynard, and Interim Executive Director Ann Boswell. So thank you for both being here today. Can I get a motion for the adoption of Hannah? Thank you very much. Didn't even get it out of my mouth. All right, with that then we'll go right to our presentation today, and we can just hold questions until the end if that's fine with everyone. Okay, so the floor is yours, Ron.
Okay.
And Ann.
Thank you. As I say, my name is Ron Maynard, and I'm the president of the PEI Federation of Agriculture. I want to thank you, the Standing Committee of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, for the invitation to the PEI Federation of Agriculture to present our comments to your committee on our shared interest of a healthy future for Prince Edward Island. The PEIFA is the province's largest general farm organization, representing a direct membership of approximately 550 farm operations, as well as 16 different commodity organizations. We cover a broad spectrum of agriculture on Prince Edward Island. Our membership is diverse, made up of families, some of them 6th and 7th generation farmers, women and men. Some are small operations producing food on small holdings, some are large. Some are just beginning, and many are well established. All of us are passionate about our industry and our future. We understand that responsible, accountable stewardship of our land and its resources is at the heart of keeping farming strong for the current and future generations of all Prince Edward Island citizens. Over the years, the objectives of the PEIFA have evolved. So among others, as they're stated in our bylaws, they include to assist in formulating and promoting agricultural policies to meet changing conditions, to promote and encourage better understanding, to administer extension programs as needed, and many more. We currently administer and deliver the PEI Farm Safety Program, the Farmer Assistance Program, the Advanced Payment Program, and partner with Farm and Food Care, whose activities include farm tours and the crop signs you saw in the fields this past summer. As you already know, the Prince Edward Island farm economic impact is the largest individual sector of our PEI economy. The agricultural sector contributes $561 million to the provincial GDP in 2019. The multiplier effect increases exponentially through our communities with impacts such as farm machinery, vehicles, suppliers, construction materials as an example. We are a $3 billion industry in a $7 billion economy. In 2019, PEI farmers employed approximately 4,900 women and men and spent over $70 million in wages. We value water. Agriculture is about growing food through plants and animals, and growing food requires a timely use of water. In the past, millions of dollars have been spent by our members and provincial and federal government programs for research and innovations to modernize farming practices and food production, as well as reduced inputs on climate change. Best management practices that reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve soil health include, but are not exclusive to, cover crops, reduced tillage, increased rotations, alternative rotational crops, tile drainage, and others. PEIFA currently delivers environmental farm plans with over 500 environmental farm plans currently in place. We are also co-signers with the Department of Agriculture and Land and the PEI Potato Board on the 4R Stewardship Program, using developed performance indicators as well inspected, respected nutrient management programs to promote the use of the right source, the right rate, the right time, and the right place for fertilizers. Partnerships are vital to our industry, and PEIFA wants to work with other stakeholders to develop an irrigation strategy. We are aligned with the PEI Potato Board and the PEI Certified Organic Producers Association. We are partnered with the PEI Watershed Alliance and others as part of an ongoing discussion. And we await the opportunity to review proposals from the PEI Department of Environment, Energy, and Climate Action specific to the irrigation strategy. The PEIFA supports the June 2021 changes to the Water Act. We believe a safe and adequate water supply for future generations is paramount. We especially believe timely and accurate water monitoring is important, and that a transparent, adequate level of controls be put in place with industry consultation. Food production needs continued access to an adequate water supply. It must be a level playing field for new and existing irrigation users, large and small. PEIFA supports a soil health improvement plan with the goal of better uptake leading to best management practices. Government resources must remain or be put in place to provide expertise for industry. With access to supplemental irrigation comes the responsibility to manage and monitor improvements to soil health as criteria for future access to supplemental irrigation. Access to water must be affordable, both fair and equitable controls, taking into consideration what is used in other jurisdictions. Various instruments for long-term development must be considered. Is the instrument of a provincial water authority structured like a crown corporation with representatives from various stakeholders a possibility? Industry is a partner with ongoing research and science-based investigation on the impact of high-capacity wells and agroeconomic impact of supplemental irrigation. PEIFA is committed to open data, fully transparent, including monitoring water use rates and local stream and watershed monitoring. Short term, we believe that if the instrument of the water withdrawal permits is used, these should be held in an easily accessible public database showing who is drawing water down and how much. It would include non-food production uses such as municipal, recreational, and industrial draws also. Long term, consideration should be given to the creation of a provincial water authority. Irrigation strategy needs to be equitable and fair to large and small producers. It needs to consider a long-term view. What is right for the future state? The issue around controls of water is an immediate concern for present day, but now is the opportunity to determine the best future. Principles that should be considered: is a provincial water authority the right instrument for determining location of wells and draw levels on a specific watershed basis? Should there be a crown corporation or a well-managed provincial water authority made up of representatives of watershed alliances, farmers, and other users, Department of Agriculture and Department of Environment? Is the provincial water authority all-encompassing, providing oversight and approvals and appeals and even physical infrastructure similar to other jurisdictions, knowing that in other jurisdictions, farmers have water provided by a public entity? Remember that at the end of the day, our farmers must be competitive with others for the marketplace. In summary, the regulations relating to food production in the Water Act need to work for all industries and public good. The PEIFA believes science-based decision-making needs to be paramount. Irrigation is not a silver bullet, but is one important tool within a very large toolbox that farmers need to have to grow safe and accessible local food. Transparency based on data and factual science to understand impacts of use and planned use of local watersheds must be available. Fairness and equity are key principles within our province and across the industry. PEIFA has a long history of working with government departments and industry partners to achieve our shared goal of a strong, reliant, vibrant, and fair industry. I thank the Standing Committee on Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability for hearing our comments today. Thank you.
Good. All right. Questions? Rob?
Thanks for the presentation here today, and we've heard numerous times actually from the Federation of Agriculture, and I do appreciate that, as you do represent the whole entire industry. One of the issues that you've made in your statement, you talked about fairness, and I've sort of used the comment a number of times that this is also discriminatory to the agricultural community. I mean, there really is no moratorium on high-capacity wells in Prince Edward Island. It's only for agricultural purposes, right, which is basically for the concept of growing food. So what's your sort of sense on that as far as how much longer are the farm community going to be prepared to wait to get some sort of a conclusion to this particular sense of discrimination that's occurring to the agricultural community?
Well, I guess discrimination is not, discrimination should end as soon as possible. And I would agree with you that has been the, seems to have been the indication that, food production was discriminated against. And so we were pleased to see the Water Act put in place. We were involved heavily with the Water Act. I, in particular, did the circuit on the water, reviewing the Water Act when first, and the white paper and everything else. So we were very pleased to see that the last time we actually appeared in front of you, I recommended that we need an irrigation strategy for Prince Edward Island. And I'm very glad that your committee is looking at that, and that's what we see as a future for water control on Prince Edward Island. Is an irrigation strategy included with the general strategy of controlling and monitoring water usage on Prince Edward Island, because we believe very strongly the importance of water, of course, as we said in our slide and as said before. Without water, nothing grows. So,
Rob?
And I'll agree with that too. And I think we've seen quite a change just from one year to the next on the demands that we would require in growing agricultural products for the use of moisture. Last year, we've seen quite a issue with farmers not having access, or not equal and fair access by all farmers. I mean, not saying that everybody had to use it and it's applicable in every location, but this year, I don't know if there's hardly any irrigation that occurred because we're fortunate enough to have the right proper moisture, and I'm hearing crops are pretty good. So I think sometimes there's an aversion or an opinion that irrigation happens all the time, and that's not always the case. The comment is supplemental irrigation. But we had the Watershed Alliance in here and made a presentation as well, and they seem to feel that there wasn't enough actual data out there to justify changing the moratorium. And I'd like to get your response to that, because once again, I've in talking to other farm groups that have come in and presented, they seem to feel that there is sufficient data, and we certainly see it in other locations, the jurisdictions that do have irrigation. So what's the Federation of Agriculture's kind of opinion on, is there enough data to make the decision? Do you feel comfortable in what the Department of Environment has forwarded as information on the data that they've been using, and just to get some sort of sense of that from you?
Well, the Department of Environment, yes, we believe the Department of Environment when experts say that there is sufficient supply of water out there to allow for supplemental irrigation. They've been saying that for many years, and the expertise that they have, we accept that.
Rob?
So we had talked a little bit about the Canadian Rivers Institute and Dr. Mike Van de Heuvel and UPEI kind of teaming up to do, I think it was 4 test wells in the area, or in the province, I should say, and to sort of try to gain more information on that. What's the Federation of Agriculture's stance on that study, and how much longer do we have to keep waiting for more studies? What I'm trying to always get the sense of is that there's always some group out there that's always trying to move the chains here a little bit. They're always trying to put something else that you still don't have this much information. It just seems to never end, I guess. And from my perspective as an MLA for an agricultural community, it just seems farmers are waiting and waiting and waiting, and so I'm just trying to get your sense of some of these studies that are waiting to happen, and then what we're dealing with some of the watershed alliances and putting more questions out there.
Well, we support that particular study of Dr. Van den Heuvel. I mean, we are the principal partner in it, so but I think that there's always, and we will always support ongoing research. I mean, whether it be on water utilization, on farm practices, on greenhouse gas mitigation. I mean, we are keepers of the environment. That's what farmers are, and so we'll continue to support research because research. That's what we're saying, is that decisions have to be based on science, the facts and the science that you have today. And so the science that you have today is what as you just commented before, the Department of Environment has said there is adequate water supply out there for supplemental irrigation. As we fine tune it, that's what we want to do with the research.
Rob?
And the research of Dr. Van den Heuvel is ongoing. We've submitted an application to where it is now is submitted an application to NSER, and we're waiting for approval from them.
Rob?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point, because I think science changes too. I mean, what we know today won't be out necessarily. We'll know more tomorrow and the day after. And I think as a society and as industries, we adapt to that, and we apply what we know at the time. We don't necessarily go back to 20 years ago, 30 years, 10 years ago. It's changed. And we had some of our committee members had the opportunity to tour some of the East Prince Environmental Agricultural Association's projects, and once again, they're learning and gaining new knowledge, and once again, you're seeing farmers really apply what sciences they have and doing research to once again increase organic matter. We hear this issue: well, you can't have irrigation until we see organic matter increase. Well, once again, it depends on the applications, the locations. There's a lot of factors in organic matter, but part of that is moisture. It's still a part of trying to grow a crop, and still part of utilizing, once again, the science that applies. So what's your sort of sense on this concept of organic matter as linkages to whether that triggers extraction of water for irrigational purposes?
Well, as we said in our program, we most certainly support the SHIP program and the environmental impacts therein. The continuous improvement, that's what we're looking for. And that's what a soil health improvement plan includes. Now, I'm certainly not a soil scientist and the details behind that, but the principle basically is that you need to continually improve your situation to continue to acquire water permits.
Rob?
Final question for this round, anyway, Mr. Chair, is you mentioned the comment that as provinces and as agricultural industries within each province, we do compete against one another. You've seen other jurisdictions significantly take away some of the potato markets that we've had in the past. I've seen Saskatchewan put together a really comprehensive irrigational promotion to try to irrigate more crops in those areas. Now, I'm not trying to compare the west Saskatchewan to Prince Edward Island. There's different geological and dynamics at play here. But how serious is the risk of not trying to be competitive from at least an irrigation strategy here to try to compete against other provinces. Because like I say, as I see, Saskatchewan and Alberta have now, I don't think Prince Edward Island is the primary #1 producer of potatoes. We might have the best quality and per acre the best potatoes, but we may not be the largest producer of potatoes in Canada anymore. How risky is that to our future as an agricultural province?
Well, I'd say that there is a risk, of course. I mean, you have to be competitive in the marketplace, and production is a criteria. I mean, quality, yes, we have quality. Most certainly last year we were not the largest. Now, hopefully this year with the crop that's being dug as we speak, we will be back to the to the top of the pile, so to speak. But I think, you know, we have to, as we said in our presentation, we have to be competitive in the marketplace. We have to be competitive for our suppliers and our customers, because there is other alternatives. People have other alternatives.
Peter?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Ron. It's great to see you again, and I appreciate meeting with you regularly, of course, and the farm tours that you've been a part of, and many of our caucuses has attended. I want to start out by just asking some questions on what sort of management or oversight you would prefer. I know in the long-term questions bit of your presentation there, you talked about a water authority and a number of principles, and I don't think anybody in the committee here and in any of the discussions we've had has any issue with the principles at all. That seems to be very shared. Principles of being science-based and transparent and appropriate for local watersheds and fair, equitable. All of those things have been repeated by each of our presenters, but they haven't always led to the same recommendations as to how we should apply that. And I didn't get a real clarity, and I'm just offering you an opportunity to say, do you feel that a province-wide government authority, a water authority, is your preferred method?
Yes, I think so, because what we're concerned with is that if you do it on a watershed-to-watershed basis, is that farmers will not be treated equally. You know, the farmers in the Bear River watershed will not be treated as the same as the farmers in the Dunk River as the farmers in the Mill River. And I guess that's why we'd like to see a overall provincial authority. Now, as far as the feet on the ground, so to speak, yeah, we think that the watersheds most certainly are, in a lot of cases, are the people to do the actual feet on the ground. You know, an agro-watershed. I'd like to see an agro-watershed group of farmers and watershed people, actually to be the organization, if you want to call it, within the watershed that actually does the monitoring, if you want to call it that, and the controls and in future and operations of the irrigation system. But I think we need an overall provincial authority to say, you know, this is the framework, this is the umbrella under which all the watersheds have to function.
Peter?
Great. I appreciate that clarity, Ron. So a centralized water authority under the auspices of the provincial government, but with other stakeholders involved. But, and this is where I'd like to drill down a bit, is many of the presenters, including Greg Donald, who was here a couple of weeks ago with the Potato Board, talked about the importance of having data from individual watersheds, because we don't have one a cookie cutter plan across all province, the whole province that will work for each watershed. So I'm wondering how you imagine that centralized authority liaising with local, whether it's the watershed group in that particular area or a local water authority, to make sure that local needs and preferences and requirements are taken into account.
Well, I guess preferences, requirements, and needs need to be universal, I guess maybe I could use the word, across the province. And then once you if it's research that you need for something, okay, that's a requirement that the watershed would put forth to the provincial authority, seeking, yes, that we have this particular, whether it be soil type, whether it be, farming capacity, in the watershed, that, we have to look at this particular research in our watershed. Now, there may be there may be 2 or 3 watersheds with the same requirement. And so I think we need a provincial authority to say, to herd the cats, if I can use that, if I can use that term that my grandmother used to use a lot. So anyway.
Peter?
I want to talk a little bit about the economics of irrigation, Ron. And as Robbie mentioned a little while ago, this year has not been a year where we've required irrigation.
And we hope that that's the norm going forth, because no one likes to irrigate. When you turn that irrigation, it costs bucks for it to work. You've got to spend the capital dollars to have it there. But I have 4 generators on my farm. I'm just as happy if I don't have to turn them on from year in to year out, but I need them on the farm to milk my cows and feed and water my cows. So.
Peter?
Thanks. So, of course, nobody knows what future climate is going to look like, although we have some very sophisticated and increasingly accurate models that tell us what we probably can expect. And this year, in that, looking at through that lens, this year was the anomaly. It wasn't, unfortunately, the norm, according to the modeling. And we have to rely on the scientists for this. And looking back at the modeling which we have used to predict climate change and the impacts it will have, both locally here in Prince Edward Island, regionally and globally, the models have been astonishingly accurate. However, they have tended to, and I'm talking about the IPCC models here, the top of the tree models, they have tended to err on the side of caution. And more often than not, the reality of climate change has exceeded what the IPCC has suggested. So I guess going back to the economics of this, of course, there's an operational cost involved in turning on whether it's your generator or your pump or whatever it is to get the water out of whether it's a well or a holding pond or whatever. But the biggest expense is the upfront capital cost for the actual center pivot or whatever you're using. And that's not insubstantial. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I know not every farmer is going to go ahead with that for a variety of reasons. Do you feel, and there was a sort of inference, I think, when we talked about other jurisdictions where there is public money to support farmers to do that, who do you feel should carry the cost of that capital expenditure, which allows you on any given year to have the ability to irrigate?
Well, if you look at other jurisdictions, I mean, that infrastructure is a public entity, whether it be the canals in Alberta. I mean, those are maintained by the municipality, and so because of fairness. I mean, you just spoke about the cost of a center pivot. The cost of center pivot is not feasible for a lot of farmers. I mean, if I look at where I farm, I'm on a peninsula of 1,400 acres. There's 5 farms in that. There's 1,100 acres of agricultural land. There's 5 farmers in there. So there's probably only 2 of us that have the scale and operation to afford to dig a well and put in a center pivot or some irrigation system. So that's the unfairness of because I milk 150 cows, and have a revenue of $1.7 million a year, I can pencil that out. My neighbor who milks 40 cows can't pencil that out. So I guess that's the if we talk about fairness, and if we talk about putting holes in high-capacity wells, are we better off in our area to say, okay, should we have one well and pipe to the farm, to the individual farms, and then once they get to the individual farms, which is what happens in other jurisdictions, the farm looks after they buy the center pivot, but they don't have the cost of the well and or the piping to it. The same as in Alberta, where you don't have the cost of the canals. My friends that use in southwestern Alberta, in Lethbridge and Pincher Creek, he hooks into the canal. It's his responsibility to get the water from the canal on his field, but he doesn't have the expense of maintaining that canal and having the water to his property. So that's what I'm saying is a long-term goal, if you want to call it that, is to provide fairness and equitable water to whether it be someone that has 500 acres of potatoes or 50 acres of potatoes or blueberries or whatever else they're irrigating.
Peter?
There's a lot of threads to pick up on that, Ron, but I'm gonna go back to one of the slides you had. I think the heading was "We Value Water," and there were a couple of slides that followed from that. And we just talked a little bit about the infrastructure costs, and I hear you saying, I think, that you feel there's a case to be made for public funds to be expended to create a more equitable access for all farmers, regardless of your size and location. I'm not going to pursue that right now, but the other cost or the other thing is water, and you say we value water, and in one sense, water is priceless. Without water, yes, I don't even need to finish that sentence, but it's also a commodity without a price. It's free. Once you have the equipment to move it around in our marketplace, and it's a very contentious discussion as to whether, when we say we value water, whether we should actually attach a cost to that water. And I'm wondering whether that's something you've thought about, whether you feel that that's a discussion we should be having in this committee. I don't believe we've had it thus far. I'd just be interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I guess if I'm in, and I had a discussion with the producer here this spring, he's within the town of Summerside. So I said to him, what happens if you hook into the town water to irrigate your fields? He's paying taxes now on the infrastructure to provide water to his farm. He's not being charged for the water, but he is being charged for the infrastructure. So I guess my question is, what's the difference between someone living in a rural area and someone living in a city? Cities are providing water to their residents. They provide the infrastructure.
Peter?
Without, again, getting into a long discussion around the costs of creating that municipal infrastructure, where you have high concentration of people, that cost can be shared through your taxes, and you can create a sewer system and a water supply system, which just is not practical in the less populated areas where I live, for example, and where you live out in the country. So there are reasons why tax rates are higher in municipalities than they are in less populated areas, because I have to dig my own well, I have to have my own septic system, for example. I want to talk a little bit about the criteria for where we are going to allow irrigation to happen. And when Greg Donald was here a few weeks ago, we talked about whether the modeling, which is what the province uses to base its data on, whether that's sufficient or whether we actually need to have hard data from individual watersheds to give us the confidence that we have actual, as you put it, I think boots on the ground is what you said, Ron. And I'm wondering and Greg, I asked him whether he felt that modeling was sufficient or that we did need that hard data. And he said, no, modeling is not sufficient. And he feels that we do need the hard data. And I'm just wondering whether you agree with that or whether you feel that the information we have now is sufficient.
Well, I mean, once again, as I go back to, I'm not an expert. I'm not a soil scientist. I'm not a hydrologist, and I would rely on, that's those people to tell me. I mean, I would see that you need the expertise, you need the practicality, and those are the people that should be making the decision.
Peter?
Just so I'm clear, Ron, you're talking about the experts within the department that we have here who are, have been working on this for all of their lives and have decades of experience. So if they say that modeling is sufficient, you're comfortable with that, and you don't feel that we need actual hard data, real-time data from particular watersheds in order to make those decisions.
Once again, the more information that you have, the better, but you have to make a decision. I mean, more has been lost by not making a decision than by waiting and waiting and waiting. And that's quite prevalent in the last, number of years that we've had this information from the Department of Environment, and yet haven't acted on it. I'm saying let's act on it now. Let's continue to do research and gaining information that we can use in the future to alter. I mean, the water authority is not a stagnant. It's not like that desk. It's a living entity, and it will change as requirements and you're talking about climate change models. I mean, we don't know what's going to take place down the road. We've just gone through. We're in the middle of this pandemic. If we would have said, 2 years ago, well, there's going to be or 4 years ago, there's going to be, your whole world is going to be turned upside down, people would have said, it's kind of that guy's kind of out in left field and or right field, whatever. But
Peter?
Indeed. The difference being that turning our world the right way up again with the pandemic is actually quite manageable, and we're already a long way there. Climate change is not like that, where the world is being turned on its head as we speak by climate change, and agriculture is one of the areas where that's being felt more acutely than almost any other sector. And so as we sit here, I think all of the models are saying the world is about to be turned on its head, is being turned on its head. And how are we going to adapt to that? And one of the ways that, and I see a lot of great initiatives, by the way, within the Department of Agriculture here. The Soil First initiative, I think, is a wonderful thing. I think the fact that we're having very in-depth conversations about how we're going to use the water resource that we have here is a really good thing, because that does not happen in other jurisdictions. And we know that over half of the world's big aquifers are being depleted unsustainably at the moment because they don't have water authority or management principles in place for a variety of reasons. But we're not going to let that happen here, and I'm very pleased that we're having the discussions that we are. But I think we need to recognize that climate change is actually turning our world on its head. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on what you see. I guess there are two ways of looking at this, Ron. Is do we carry on with the same model of agriculture that we do and mitigate and adapt to the inevitable climate change that's coming by putting in expensive irrigation systems, for example? Or do we change agriculture to be more appropriate for the changing climate that is already here and that we know is likely to be here in the future? And maybe it's not an either or, maybe we can do both, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
I think you just said the last. We have to do both. You have to look at the future, but you also have to look at today. And so, I mean, the response to today is irrigation, supplemental irrigation. In the future, you know, you look at, you look at varied crops. I mean, as the climate changes, I mean, we're like, I'm a dairy farmer. We haven't cut our corn silage yet. You know, my partner is going crazy because this is Thanksgiving. We should have, you know, these piles should be in here. It should be done, but yet our agrologists tell us it's not ready. You know, it's not going to be ready. It's going to be next week now before it's ready. You know, and so this is something that, you know, this was a mid-September chore, cutting corn silage, and now it's, you know, we're in mid-October. So I mean, you've got to look at the present situation. You've got to look at the future situation, and I think so. You deal with what you have in front of you, and what we have in front of you now is the you know, what we've seen, as you say very clearly, Peter, in the models where you know, lack of moisture in July and August is something that's critical to continuing to maintain farming operations for the next half a dozen years. Yes, you look at what can I do next year? What can I do this year to say, you know, shorter term varieties, longer term varieties maybe if the growing season is longer. You know, can you push that? Can you push that instead of looking at planting in April? Can you push that plant back to, you know, planting it in June? So I mean, there's you know, the use of variant crops. You know, this term that's being, this regenerative agriculture is something that's being looked at and more, and it's people saying, all right, you know, the aspect of getting back to the use of livestock, and then including that in your rotation. I mean, all those things are future possibilities. But you've got to maintain your farming operation for today also. So, and that's where we're thinking that supplemental irrigation is what's needed. You know, realizing once again, as I said, supplemental irrigation is a tool in the toolbox. It's not the silver bullet. The silver bullet is being adaptive enough to change with the changing climate and the changing environment, changing market. So.
Peter?
Thanks, Chair. And I appreciate that answer very much, Ron. And I think I have some sense of the complexities and the subtleties and nuances involved in adapting to the changes. And I'm most impressed with a lot of the initiatives that I see in the agricultural community in terms of diversity of crops. You just talked about new varietals there. And I understand there's like 250,000 test varietals out in fields this year, of which they expect only to get a couple will actually come to fruition whenever that process is complete. That's extraordinary, you know, putting in that kind of R&D, and that's wonderful. In terms of supplemental irrigation, which is what this committee is meeting to talk about, you mentioned the canals in Alberta, and thankfully we have natural surface water here on Prince Edward Island, nicely distributed across our province. We also have holding ponds, and we have high-capacity wells and low-capacity wells, which are being used. What role do you see holding ponds having in this future of supplemental irrigation here on PEI?
Well, I guess I see it as being part of your strategy. If that's the the holding ponds are there now. To utilize them, I think is feasible. Whether you want to use holding ponds in the future, if you can draw directly from the aquifer, I think that's, we know that there's the cost of the holding ponds, if you're filling them, I guess that's the other aspect. If it's a holding pond and you're using catchment and filling it from natural resources, natural, spring overflow, that's fine. But if you're filling it from the aquifer anyway, why are you putting it in a holding pond and letting evaporation and all the other things? The ducks may be happy, but there's enough duck ponds in other places and instead of drawing it directly from the aquifer itself.
Peter?
Yeah, they're expensive duck ponds, that's for sure, Ron. If that's, those are the ones who benefit most. And in the farm tours, it seemed pretty clear to me from the discussions we had with the various farmers that just exactly as you've said, Ron, that the most efficient and effective way of delivering water to the crops is directly out of the ground rather than putting it in a holding pond and the evaporation that occurs through doing that. However, I like you, I believe that holding ponds when spring fed or when naturally fed or run off or whatever are a really valuable tool in certain instances. So you feel that holding ponds do have a place in future irrigation, but your preference would be for the water that we use to irrigate crops to be taken directly out of the ground through high capacity wells. Is that?
The example of this year. We've seen very little irrigation, but yet evaporation has continued, whereby the evaporation from the aquifer is none. And it's a cost factor also. Those are expensive to build and maintain and everything else. So,
Peter?
I think I'm good. Thank you, Chair. Thanks a lot.
Darlene?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ron and Ann, for coming in today. Ron, if it helps you any, the silage is not cut on our land yet either, so we have 60 acres there that's probably won't be cut for a couple of weeks, I don't think. As we sit in this committee, as with anything now, you can find a report that backs whatever your opinion is or whatever you're saying, so it makes it more difficult all the time for committees and people that are trying to make decisions on important issues like irrigation strategy. We talk about there's no silver bullet. There are a lot of ways of, increasing the organic matter of your soil, zero tilling, changing the variety of crop that you plant. So as part of the irrigation strategy, do you feel that government or the department that's going to administer or accept these applications for high capacity wells, does there need to be a checklist? I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and this is my last resort. Or, how do you anticipate that looking as far as the irrigation strategy and applying to government for, a well?
Well, I think as we said, that we need a soil health improvement plan, and many farmers already have that. They are working with the agrologists and people in the field that they realize now very clearly the importance of soil health. And so I think that's the basis of your application, is that, hey, this is where I am now. This is my plan to move forward on monitoring and execute the plan.
Darlene?
Thank you, Chair. So, with that, looking at your soil health, which includes, I know the land that we have is now, zero till basically, and what a difference that's made in the improvement to the soil, because, you're not plowing it under and, sandblasting our house because we're on the shore, but what a difference it's made We've also, the farmers also, tilled under crops that were just planted to increase the soil health. And it really needed that because, it had Roundup beans in beforehand, and really there wasn't, the focus wasn't on the health of the soil. And I do see that as very important. But also, where does changing the variety of, say, potato that you grow, does that come into play? Or would a farmer be expected to do that before they would come and say, I need a deep water well?
Well, in one sense, I would look at your soil health improvement plan. What is your plan and if varietal changes or crop changes or tillage practices is what you're looking at, then it's not I think you've got to look at each individual farm as a responsible, organized or responsible individual that says, hey, this is my future, and this is how I'm going to maintain my future.
Darlene?
And on that note, and I fully believe farmers are probably the most innovative people I've ever met, because I don't know how you carry on from year to year with all the variables that you have to contend with. And I know the farmers that I know personally are continually working on, how can I be more efficient? And it's about saving money. It's about, being better stewards of the land. It's about, leaving it for my next generation because they're looking at succession planning. So, I'm fully in support of all that you do through the Federation for farmers and with farmers. But as government, we're looking at how do we set this up as far as an irrigation strategy, and then what is government's role as far as adherence and enforcement and all of that. And I don't know if you've thought about that part of it. What do you envision that looking like when someone applies for a permit? They're going to have their soil strategy, but then moving forward. And I'm not saying, because I fully believe farmers are going to act as responsible as possible, but we still need to have something on paper that gives us a step-by-step process. So, and with each farm, we know there are different variables for sure, but we still need an outline as to what that looks like. But also, what does adherence and enforcement look like in your mind?
Well, I guess, assurance programs, farm insurance programs are something that's ongoing with farmers. As I say, I'm a dairy farmer with our Pro-Action initiative within the dairy industry. We have assurance programs, and we have third-party people that come in and assess the farm for animal welfare. I know we're looking right now at, we've just introduced as of September this year, the environment aspect of the Pro-Action initiative. The potato industry has a number of assurance programs going on, and so I think that's the model is out there. It needs to be expanded. There needs to be a third-party assessment, if you could say, of is that farm, their plan is there. Have they executed their plan, and has the plan worked? And if it hasn't worked, what's the, if it has worked, great. If it hasn't worked, what are the reasons for it, and what's the plan and to move ahead? And that if you're not moving ahead, there is consequences.
Darlene?
Yeah, thanks, Sharon. And I think that's kind of what I'm getting at is, we kind of are doing circling in theory of what would happen, but in reality, what does this look like? And for government to be able to tap into all of the resources that are there, I think is really important. And I've said from the very beginning, we don't want to, kick this down the road any further. We want a decision made, and we're, as government, we're really working towards that. So,
I think there is examples of programs out there that can be used and can be adapted to this. This is not, assurance is something that the industry has now taken as a cost of doing business, you might say. And so I think that's would be the same as this. The animal assessment people that come onto our farm, there is a cost for us for doing that. but we realize very clearly that that's the cost of doing business. That's what our consumers require us to know, that those animals that we care for are cared for humanely and safely.
Hannah?
Thank you, Gordon. Thanks very much for the presentation. I wanted to come back to a couple of points, and it was around the governance structure. So I know we've gotten into there's the details of the how, but that bigger picture is sort of one of the things that we know is probably one of the key foundational pieces around what we want to see in the strategy in terms of what foundation needs to be there so that the right people are at the table when we roll out the how. And one of the pieces that we've heard about consistently, both from the department and from the various stakeholders that have been in and presented, is about that arm's length decision making, which would be, as my colleague said, as Darlene said, around the government has those kind of requirements, what they have to do, but within that we want to see some arm's length with a good range of stakeholders at the table. One of the things that we have talked about in other, but Peter brought it up as well, is around that piece around climate change. And unfortunately we haven't had the release of the climate change risk assessment yet. It's due, but that is going to be a key tool, I think, in terms of helping to also, frankly, inform some of the strategies and decisions that are going to be made. And that needs to be considered when we are talking about the strategy, because that climate change risk assessment being done across that federal, provincial, municipal level, looking out probably to 2050, will actually do things like inform the level of risk that is inherent in some of the decisions that we make, which could inform, for instance, whether insurance rates go up or whether coverage is available. We know that risk assessment tool is going to provide a tool that sets priorities as well from a larger whole of government for adaptation, for that big decision making. And so when I hear you talk about the governance structure, how would you see that being a priority to also ensure that there is that representation from that climate perspective at that governance table, and also those other stakeholders, that federal, provincial, municipal, particularly in the light of municipal being, as you mentioned earlier, a heavy user of water from an industrial and residential perspective. So I guess two parts. Sort of, who are the other stakeholders that need to be at that governance body level to bring those different perspectives?
Well, I think in developing a water authority and the powers there invested in it, I think you want to have a wide range of stakeholders, the expertise, but also, the users. My expertise and knowledge is in dairy, and so this whole I just mentioned with Pro-Action Initiative. Pro-Action Initiative was based on technical people. We have researchers, we have in animal welfare, we have researchers, we have veterinarians, we have SPCA people, but in every one of those, along with we have farmers, and because there needs to be a practicality of these regulations and rules. And so that's what I think in the broader stakeholder, once again, all agreeing that, we have to be nimble, but we have to have action also.
Hannah?
So if we're talking about needing to establish a water authority for the province, which would be a third party or arm's length organization from government informed by the government regulations and the Act, but that has the water authority or the decision making or oversight, whatever that may look like, that's the authority for water as a whole for the province. It's not just for farming. So we have that priority that's set for disaster management, for residential use, for industrial use, and obviously we would like to see is that farming and food production is actually made a priority. We talked about that in, I don't know if you, in some previous committees, and I think that's really important, that we actually make a point that food production shouldn't be lumped in at the bottom of the pile with other industrial uses like car washes and cruise ships. It needs to move up the list. But the water authority itself is for the entirety of our use of water. So that water authority needs to reflect the agricultural community, but it also should include those voices for those other industries and uses. So municipal representation. But I guess my question, my point around that too is, and you spoke a lot about that need to plan and adapt, is when we think about climate change and the impact of climate change, we need to assess risk. We need to be really honest about what that risk could look like. And as you said, we need to be in the moment of what's happening this year, but that adaptation may need to be really quite significant. So having people at the table, at that authority that are prepared to talk about longer term big decisions, it would be much more valuable for that to be happening with those stakeholders there rather than having to be pushed from government, right? We would rather see that it's the stakeholders that recognize and talk about how they need to adapt rather than having it pushed on them, because as you pointed, the other thing that happens is when government has to do it, it takes too long. Yes. So there's a real opportunity there to have the chance to be more in charge of what those longer term plans look like as well. But having to be able to have those honest conversations about maybe some really difficult adaptations, like maybe, you mentioned earlier about everybody having to have access to water. There may not be enough water for every person that wants to have access to water for their farm to be able to do it. And then how do we make that decision? Like there has to be criteria somewhere that says we have hit the limit. And that's the kind of really difficult decisions that governance body may need to do. Right? And those are conversations that we need to be comfortable to have, because we can't avoid that reality of hard decisions now as well as coming in the future.
That's right. You have to make decisions.
Yeah,
and that's the thing that hasn't happened in the past. Yeah. And that's what we say with the water authority. I mean, their role is for water on Prince Edward Island. And yes, you set your criteria. You set your priorities for today. You set your priorities for, in the short term, several years, and you set your priorities for long term. But I think the other aspect of it, you have to have flexibility, because there's not much use of saying, well, I'm preserving water for 2050, and having 2022 or 2023, no action.
No, agreed. We're not talking about preserving water. We're talking about preserving our social economic structure. Like as Peter said, if we don't have water, we don't have anything. And the climate risk assessment, a climate risk assessment plan is designed to look at the entire thing. Like how do we save our life as we know it, to make sure that we still do have that to give to our children. It's not just about a small window. It's that risk assessment is going to look at social economic structure of our province in the light of the impact of climate change. And so they're going to be tough decisions that have to come, and so that has to be part of the lens of what we do. And that does mean that things are going to have to change. And so, I do think that we need to be clear when we talk about empowering a water authority, which, don't get me wrong, I am fully in favor of an arm's length Crown Corporation or some structure that has that authority, because it is absolutely able to be more responsive than government can or will be. But you're also downloading a really significant responsibility onto that organization. And that's a lot to ask, and they need to be aware that that's what they're going to be asked to do. And from beyond the lens of a farmer or a community, but for the province as a whole.
Well, yes, and that's happened in other jurisdictions. I mean, that we've been very fortunate here to have a climate that's forgiving, if I might use that. Some of my other colleagues involved in the International Dairy Federation, some of my colleagues in Australia, for example, don't have that luxury. The water authority is water authority and God are at the same level, but that's the world that they live in. But they have to do that in order to continue to farm in that particular area.
Anna?
No, I'm good,
You're
thank
good?
you. Thank you, Corey, thank you.
Rob?
Thanks, Chair. I just want to pick up a little bit more on this water authority, and I sort of feel that the sense of a water authority makes a lot of common sense. And
I didn't see that. I'll mark it
so
down.
I want to get more an idea of what the Federation of Agriculture's view of a water authority. Do you look at this as an elected board or an appointed board or a combination therein? A sense of maybe how big a board should be? We'll go with some common sense that it would be representative of across the island, of course, but and if it's appointed by whom? Just to get a sense of that.
I mean, that's not something that we've discussed, and not something, I think the aspect of it, as I said before, you want to have a good cross-section of both control, if I use that, control type people and user type people, and then common sense or lay people, if I could use that word also, for lack of a better word. So I think you want a mix of once again, I mean, there's water authorities in other places. Take a look and see what their success, and what I'm one that I don't believe in. If something works somewhere else, I'm quite easy with copying that. And so I think if you look, there is successful water authorities and commissions in other places, and so that's what I would do.
Rob?
I guess one of my comments, would be if you made it a solely elected board, as an example, sometimes that can be manipulated politically it's okay an appointed board, don't get me wrong here, but sometimes there are people out there that are very zealot-like in their approach to decision-making, and maybe when it comes to water, that there's certainly people very passionate about it and may not always apply the science and the background to that. So once again, people can mobilize to try to get certain people on boards to stop water authority or stop extraction. And I think the point I'm trying to make in the end of the day here comes back to viability and flexibility for farmers. I know Darlene mentioned a little bit about zero-till, and zero-till certainly works for certain crops. I've not, at this point in time, and technology can see how zero-till can work in the potato industry, as an example. I don't know how you plant potatoes without tilling the soil, nor is there a way to harvest that. So I think you have to provide our agricultural producers, no matter what commodity and what piece of land that they're farming on, some flexibility. And that flexibility comes from another tool in the toolbox that can help strategize their way out of a situation where there is no moisture. So I go back to that viability statement. I mean, as a former farmer and a person who was impacted significantly by the mad cow fallout, you can only stay in business for so long. and if climate change is, like say, what this year is more an abnormal year than a normal year, you cannot farm viably over a long period of time with too many years where moisture was what was required to give you a viable crop or a profitable crop. So I guess that's where I just want to sort of get that sense of, it's great to say that we need water for the future, and I would assume that anything that we're doing is looking at the science that bases things on sustainability, and the water that we extract would be extra or where there is a renewable resource that can be renewed. So we have to try to look at making farmers viable today give them the flexibility that they can grow the crops and on the particular pieces of land that they want for the commodity that they're growing, and that they can do it, once again, sustainably if they require that tool of supplemental irrigation. So what's your viewpoint as sort of what I'm saying here? Does that seem to make sense? Because farmers can't continue to farm forever and lose money. And yet we have to use the science that we have today and adapt it as we move forward tomorrow for whatever climate change throws at us.
Yeah, I think that you're correct that you've got to adapt. And adapting means using the tools that you have available to be successful today and into the future. And one of those tools is supplemental irrigation. You know, it's not for, it won't be for everyone. Some people will choose other paths. But that's, you know, we want to make sure those paths are available.
Ola?
Thank you, Chair. So thanks for the presentation. I was privileged to go to on a couple of farm tours and was very impressed with the professionalism and concern of all the farmers in terms of soil and soil health in particular. So you mentioned that one of the criteria for getting water rights would be that you maintain the soil health at a proper level. How do you see that happen? Would it be a precondition that you have, say, 3% organic matter before you even get a permit, or is it, are there some other criteria?
I think what I said is that we look at a soil health improvement plan. And so you establish where you are now and your plan for improving.
Ola?
So I understand your answer that just having a plan, which we know plans don't always work out, in your opinion, is enough to get one.
I don't think having a plan and executing the plan and monitoring the results. I mean, this to Minister Compton's comment about how do you do an assessment on those plans. And I think that's has to be part of it too, is that there has to be a follow-up and say, okay, you know, this is my plan, this is my 2-year plan, this is my 5-year plan. You know, okay, where are you in 2 years' time? Or where are you in 5 years' time? And so the plan is a living document, and it has to be assessed.
Ola?
I appreciate that. So you're not asking farmers to submit to actual soil testing to see if the plans have worked as a precondition for getting water rights, as long as you have a working plan in place. And maybe that's a reasonable thing.
Well, the plan, you know, as I said before, I'm not a soil scientist. I think the aspect of a soil scientist and hydrologist will you know, develop, you'll work with them to develop your plan.
Ola?
Okay, thanks, Chair. And I also appreciate your concern that farmers should be treated fairly and equally. And I was wondering, we already have some watersheds that are already stressed, like Winter River, for instance. They've been drawing excess water there for decades. I understand Millvale, where the new well field is already more or less at its limits, and we all know about Dunk River. How do you see fairness being applied in those areas? Would the Water Authority tell Charlottetown to dig some more wells in other areas, or would farmers in those areas just have to live with the fact that there aren't any more water permits available? How do you see being fair there?
Well, that's a very good question, and you know, I guess you have to live with what resources you have. I mean, the fairness of you know, the quality of my land that I farm on the peninsula is quite different from the quality of land that I have in Spring Hill. I have to live with that fact. And so I think, I adapt, and so you adapt to, if there's no more water, there's no more water in that particular area. How do you get water if that's what you need is another question.
Ola?
Well, that sort of gets to the, I think the elephant in the room, all the talk about irrigation or not, sort of assumes that no matter what happens, that there will be water in the ground to use for irrigation. But as we all know, weather and water coming down is totally unpredictable, even looking back at things that have already happened in PEI, such as, for instance, very low snowfall during the winter, so you get a lot of frozen grounds. Follow it with spring rains that doesn't go into the ground because it's frozen, sort of washes off the land. Follow it with droughts that we have already had examples on, like the year before last year, whenever it was. So you can very easily see spring coming, not in 20 years, but with current variations in climate where there basically wouldn't be any water. So how do you see farmers being protected for that? And now they not only have a crop in the ground, but they have invested in irrigation as well. Who covers that? What does the Water Authority do?
The Water Authority has to deal with what it has as a source. I mean, my colleagues in Alberta, my friend in Pincher Creek, I mean, if there's no snow in the mountains, he knows that there's going to be less water for him to, and so instead of planting, a crop that needs moisture, needs a lot of water, he'll plant less or plant something different. I mean, you adapt to the resources that you have. Same as I say with my land. What I can plant in Port Hill is quite different from what I can plant in Spring Hill.
Ola?
But the potato farmer has planted all his fields in potatoes, feeling reassured because he has already invested in the irrigation thing, so he feels reassured. He can water his crop, except he can't. So what happens then?
I think with monitoring and with the monitoring of water sources, that's something that is known beforehand, and that's some of the research, the aspect of the research that we're doing with the Vandenheuvel. That's some of the information that is there and could be utilized for such a situation. If we know if it's a severe drought for 2 or 3 years, we know that there's going to be a whole lot less water. I mean, we've had sufficient moisture this year, so I'm sure the levels of water in the aquifer are probably at their peak. But I mean, if you have 2 or 3 years of drought, then the situation changes.
Ola?
Okay, thank you.
I guess I think that wraps it up for questions. Do you, any kind of final words for the committee before you take off?
Thank the committee very much for the time. And we hope that you kind of take this, or some of our suggestions into consideration. Once again, the Federation is more than willing to work and looks forward to working with both government and industry and our rest of our stakeholders to provide a future that is sustainable and both environmentally and economically for our members. and thus, with showing the importance of agriculture in this province, and we talk about soil health. I mean, I think we do a lot here on Prince Edward Island already regarding soil health, and we want to do more because we realize very clearly that soil is our resource. We have we don't have minerals or oil or but we do have maybe the most important resource, and that is soil. And the importance of keeping that soil and maintaining it and enhancing it to everyone's future is critical. So thank you for your time, and anything else that we can do with you, we most certainly will be appreciative. I want to thank Anne for, as you know, Robert Godfrey has moved on to other sources, and Anne has been good enough to step in and cover for that. We have presented a job offer to a new candidate. He has accepted, and he will be in place by November 15th. He has not informed his present employer of his coming with us, but he is a Charlottetown Rural graduate, a UPEI graduate, and is someone that's an experienced executive director and is coming home to Prince Edward Island. So, and I think some of you in this room probably know him. So.
You're narrowing it down.
Well, we hope within the next few days to be able to make it public. But thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Ann. We'll just recess for a moment while you pack up. Okay, next on the agenda, we have a request to present. I don't know, Clerk, if you'd want to give maybe some context to, I'm assuming the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Water wants to present on the sustainable irrigation strategy.
They do. That was a recent, I believe they sent that off to me yesterday morning. So just knowing the committee's schedule, obviously tomorrow is the last scheduled meeting before the planning week. We could schedule a morning meeting during this session. As long as the committee's aware, we have to end at enough time to give broadcast the time to switch over for the afternoon session. And then that would kind of push report discussions to potentially the second week is the only thing, if the committee's okay with that. For either of those submissions, if we were to go ahead with those requests.
And this, I was curious if, and perhaps we would like to have them in, but I don't really want to meet during the House sitting, because then it just becomes every committee starts meeting during the House sitting, but that's just my personal view on that. But if they had specific recommendations for the sustainable irrigation strategy that they wanted to see, wanted the committee to consider, they could send us a letter with those before we do our report, instead of having another meeting. I don't want to take away from, I know we've had them in before and they presented, and I don't want to take away from that, but just our schedule doesn't quite allow it, but I don't know what the committee thinks. Hannah?
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate you speaking about not meeting during the session. I do think we did try to arrange it that way, and it's something we've talked about in other committees as well, and I just, it is really hard to try and fit those in when we're also have the full days and prepping in the sitting. I know that this has only just come in, and I'm afraid I wasn't on the committee when they presented previously. Could you say what was the context of the previous presentation? Was it on the same thing?
On the regulations?
On the regulations for the Water Act.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, we also have a really full week next week with it being planning week.
Yeah.
So I'm not, as much as I do want to hear from them, but I just don't know how we fit that in. We do have Public Accounts is meeting next week at 10 in the morning for like a brief session. That's the only committee I think that has right now is going ahead, but we're not planning for anything else after that, so time is tight.
So is the committee all right with, if we ask them to send us a letter with what they would like to see in that strategy? Hal?
Chair, I'm just wondering, because when this was put out to the public, it was put out on June the 16th, asking for anybody who wanted to send comments in, and the deadline was September the 1st. So what was the date on that request?
I just got that request yesterday.
So I think it's more than appropriate that we ask, I mean, we can ask for at least a written submission, and we don't need to meet with them.
Okay.
And just to clarify, that's on the Coalition for the Protection of PEI Water.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. All right, so I think we have consensus on that. Okay. And the Council of Canadians PEI chapter and the Climate Emergency Unit.
Yeah, so the request in front of you, they want to talk about how PEI could build capacity to tackle our climate emergency. They did request that it be during the fall sitting, but we can use that maybe if the committee wants to go ahead with that as the first meeting after the session, something like that.
In like January or something? Is that fine? Rob?
Makes perfect sense to me, Mr. Chair. Like I say, I think we're not trying to stop anybody from presenting, so if the Coalition for the Protection of Water gives us a written presentation for that section, we've fulfilled our obligations. And the other subject is probably a little different than what we're dealing with on the irrigation issue, so my opinion would be a priority group to meet once the House adjourns in the fall.
Okay. Good. All right. Excellent. Hannah?
Do we have a current sort of what else we have on our work plan for the next?
I don't have it up right now, but I believe our work plan is kind of exhausted at this point. So we could maybe, if that's going to be our jumping off point for after this session, that we could add a work plan to the end of that meeting, just to kind of get, yeah.
For our report,
Yes.
do we want, would the committee prefer to come and meet next Thursday to do that, or would we rather try and, I know during the session, but meet kind of not, well, sometimes that can take a while, but briefly, instead of making, I don't know, something like, I know like Hal, like to come out next Thursday again, come down next Thursday for a report, to meet on a report, I don't know, or would you rather do it when the House is sitting in the morning, try and do it briefly then? I don't know what the committee thinks. Rob?
I don't have a problem with doing it in, say, an earlier session once the fall sitting starts. As far as next week, it was meant to be a planning week.
Yeah.
I'm already filled up pretty well with meetings on it, so I think we got to start to try to respect the wishes of the legislature by establishing a planning week. So my opinion would be that's
Like a Thursday morning when the House is sitting?
that would be my thinking,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not ideal, but at least it would be the only
And the
one.
usual practice, Chair, of, having a report in advance means we could
Yeah.
come in prepared to discuss it,
Yeah.
then that would work well, yeah.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right.
And then if we could have a conversation then about work planning or bring items that we want to have for a work plan, that would be
Yeah,
when we could do that.
perfect. Okay. Any new business? No?
And we're meeting again tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yes, to get that in, so be nice to have it done. Yeah. Okay. All right, motion to adjourn? So moved, thank you.